Hello, my friends, and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 tier listing guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today, we're continuing with part 2 of my Illithid Powers tier list, and we're going to be talking about the Elite Powers. Just like with part 1, this list will contain some story spoilers, in fact, a few more, because these are powers you don't get until the end of Act 2, so I just want to warn you about that before we start. These powers you acquire at the very end of Act 2, so they're only really usable in Act 3, with one exception of a power that I just stuck in here because I didn't cover it in Act 1. So you have to judge these powers by the standards of Act 3 encounters. What that means is that they have to be quite powerful in order to be useful, because this is the point where your characters have reached the peak of their power level and have access to all the best spells, all the best items, all the best feats and class features in the game. So in order to be worth using, the Illithid powers have to be quite excellent. Luckily, they are, and there are some Illithid powers in this list that are absolutely phenomenally powerful and worthy of diving deep into the Illithid form in order to achieve them. Two very quick things before I dive in. So I'm on a brand new microphone, as you can probably hear, and I'm still dialing in the sound settings and recording space, so definitely let me know if you think there are changes I should make to the sound quality, or if there are periods of the recording where you hear background interference, or the mic cutting out, or the noise gate jumping in. I'd really appreciate you pointing those out to me. And secondly, I want to say thank you so much to Lad Juzo for the $20 donation, and Timothy Dog for the $10, as well as Christopher Gilbranson, River, and Michael Baya for becoming channel members, and to all of you who've chosen to donate and become members that made it possible for me to upgrade my audio equipment. So I really do appreciate your support. It really does mean a lot, and it really helps. Thank you so much, my friends. Finally, I'm recording this before I have seen everyone's feedback to part 1 of this tier list, but nevertheless, on reflection, there are two powers that I want to move after having posted the tier list, just based on the definitions of the tiers that I gave and sort of how powerful I think those abilities are. I'm moving Psionic Backlash from B tier to A tier, because while it is a relatively mild effect on its own, it of course combines with Cold a Week to sometimes kill low health enemies, but more importantly, it's just a reaction that characters without powerful reactions can use. So on like an archer or a martial character, it's extremely valuable and just gives you a source of a reaction for your party that if you aren't a character that has normal uses for your reactions, you can benefit very strongly from that. The ability to use a reaction on many turns of a given combat is always very powerful, and using an action type that your character might not normally use, even for a relatively minor effect, is very powerful and I think worthy of A tier. And then secondly, I think Concentrated Blast I am bumping up from D tier to C tier, because while it is a very small amount of damage and you shouldn't typically build around it, it nevertheless is a power that will come up throughout the game, because it has no saving throw and because you will often be concentrating on something, and sometimes you just have a free bonus action and are concentrating on a spell. You can get a little bit of extra value out of Concentrated Blast, so I'm going to move it to C tier. Let me know if you think there are other of these powers that I should move, and I will definitely take that into account. All right, let's get into the Elite Powers. Next, let's just talk briefly about what these Elite or Astral Tadpole powers actually are, because acquiring them works a little bit differently than acquiring the central or middle ring of powers. You acquire access to these powers when the Emperor gives you the Astral Tadpole at the end of Act 2, the Astral Touched Tadpole. You can then commune with it in order to unlock the outer ring of powers, but this has a couple of different effects, and there's a couple different ways to do it. There are two choices for communing with the Astral Touched Tadpole. You can either open your mind to it or eat it. If you eat it, you gain access to the powers, but the tadpole itself is destroyed and no other characters can use it. If you open your mind to it, you gain access to the powers, and the tadpole survives and can be used by other companions if you can convince them to use it. Obviously, with absent another mechanical benefit, you'd rather be able to give this to multiple characters, so it's better to open your mind to the tadpole than to eat it, because there is no benefit to eating the tadpole. Opening your mind is the same, but other characters can then use it. When you do so, you unlock access to the outer ring of powers and can then spend tadpoles on learning them, and also all of the central ring of powers, the 5 central powers at the beginning of the that you learned right at the beginning: Psionic Overload, Favorable Beginnings, Force Tunnel, Concentrated Blast, and Transfuse Health, you learn automatically. Any tadpoles you've spent on those powers are refunded, so don't worry about losing value on if you've spent tadpoles on those already. You will get the tadpoles back and can immediately probably learn a bunch of outer ring powers with those tadpoles. What this means is that even if you've been spending all of your tadpole powers on a single character, your entire party can be given the 5 central powers for free by communing with the astral tadpole. So you should always be able to get those 5 powers on every character in your party. You also immediately unlock and automatically learn fly. So every character that communes with the astral tadpole learns fly, and thus that can also be given to your whole party. So this way you can make sure that your entire party has access to some of the very powerful level 1 abilities or inner circle abilities. Even just getting favorable beginnings on your entire party is very powerful by itself, so it's absolutely worth it to give your entire party the astral touched tadpole from a mechanical standpoint, obviously, if your playthrough supports that from a story perspective. First up, we're going to talk about Survival Instinct. So this is actually not one of the elite or outer ring powers. It's not, you don't require the astral tadpole in order to unlock it. You get it through the quest Help Ameloum Investigate the Parasite. And if you succeed in that quest, which is very easy to do, all you have to do is bring him certain items which you're going to find as you explore the Underdark, then you unlock the Survival Instinct power. You can't use it unless you've unlocked another Illithid power. It just does not show up as an option. But if you have, then you gain the ability to cast a buff on an ally. This spell has a somewhat confusing tooltip, so I'll tell you exactly what it actually does. It's a 60-foot range, short rest recharge action, which again, as with all of the other Illithid powers that take an action, becomes a bonus action if you have the Zathis. When cast on a character, it gives them 3 turns of a buff. The duration's not listed anywhere, but it lasts for 3 turns, where if they hit 0 hit points, they heal for 3d4 instead of falling unconscious. Overall, this is not a particularly powerful effect. Even as a bonus action, it's not significant in terms of keeping your allies alive, because you need to have an ally who's low health and about to take a bunch of hits, know that they're going to be targeted, which enemies sometimes won't, although low health allies are often priority targets for the enemy AI, so if you have played a lot of the game and have a good sense of what the AI will target, you can usually know that an ally is going to be targeted and hit them with Survival Instinct ahead of time, and then it only heals them for 3d4, which preventing death once is obviously a really excellent feature. You know, you'd rather be alive than dead, but the fact that you have to anticipate it in advance, it only lasts for 3 turns, and you have to cast it on an ally who's about to be attacked, and it can easily be wasted, does hold this ability back. Nevertheless, it's essentially free once you have bonus action casts, provided you don't have other things to do with your bonus actions, but it's fairly likely that you do have other better things to do with your bonus actions on your Illithid Powers character, because you get so many good bonus action Illithid Powers. Typically, I wouldn't recommend spending a bonus action on casting Survival Instinct. There are definitely times when it can come up, and it can be okay in some circumstances. It also does not have to be a companion that you cast it on. You can cast it on a summon or anything along those lines, and they will still receive the healing. Which can be a little more helpful to keep your ranger companion alive, your beast companion alive, or a specific summon that you want to keep alive. But overall, this is such a minor amount of healing. It has to be cast in advance. It can't get an ally up from the ground, which is what you usually want bonus action healing for. So I'm going to rate it D tier. I think that this is one to keep it in your back pocket. Just remember that you have it, because it will come up occasionally, but those times will be few and far between. So by the definitions of the tiers that I gave in part 1, it's going into D tier. Next up, and the first of the true elite tier powers, Fracture Psyche. In order to learn Fracture Psyche, you need to have learned either Ability Drain or Illithid Expertise, and most of the elite tier powers are like this, where they'll have one prerequisite from the middle ring, or an alternative prerequisite from the outer ring, if you've learned their adjacent power already, so you can come at them from two different directions in order to possibly learn them. Fracture Psyche is a short rest cooldown action, which becomes a bonus action with the Zafisk. That's a 30-foot range debuff. 30 feet is actually relatively short for a debuff range. It makes it somewhat difficult for positioning with this ability, but it does target an intelligence save, and intelligence saves are a very good one to target because many dangerous enemies have very low intelligence, and so you can reliably land abilities that target their intelligence. If they fail the saving throw, they receive for 5 turns the Fractured Psyche debuff, which reduces their armor class and saving throws by 1. The tooltip only says it reduces armor class, but it also reduces saving throws, and that's actually the more important part, so maybe this is another one for the bad tooltips video sequel if I end up doing that. If the enemy dies while under this debuff, then you can recast the Shatter Psyche ability, which does exactly the same thing, except on a different enemy, does exactly the same thing, but reduces the enemy armor class and saving throws by 2, so is a little bit more powerful. If that enemy dies, you can continue to recast Shatter Psyche on more and more enemies, so you can conceivably chain through a bunch of enemies. Reducing enemy saves by 2 isn't terrible. Reducing enemy saves and armor class by 1 is pretty marginal. And spending your bonus action when, again, you're an Illithid Powers user, sort of by definition, if you've reached the outer ring of powers, you're going to have a lot of great bonus actions. So Fracture Psyche is pretty low down the list of things that you want to do. You can use this to land a very important spell. Maybe you just want to debuff an enemy's saving throws before trying to land Hold Person, so you can hit them with Fracture and then hit them with Hold Person, and it makes that slightly more likely. But in general, there are better ways of ensuring that your spells land. Obviously, if you don't have the Zafisk and this has to be used as an action, it's completely useless. It's a truly terrible spell as an action, but even as a bonus action, I think this is very narrow and marginal use cases. You can use it before landing an important spell, but generally speaking, you're going to be better off using your bonus action to do most other things. It's effectively the level 1 spell Bane, except it only hits one enemy, and has slightly less effect. So in general, I wouldn't recommend spending time on casting Fractured Psyche. D tier with very occasional use to land an important spell if you have no other better use for your bonus action. Illithid Expertise. Illithid Expertise is a passive that requires you to have unlocked either Luck of the Far Realms, which you probably have, or Fracture Psyche, which you probably haven't unless you're just going for completion. Illithid Expertise just gives you expertise in all of the dialogue skills: Persuasion, Deception, and Intimidation. And it works similar to the Actor feat, where you don't have to know those skills in order to gain expertise in them, so you gain double your proficiency bonus without ever having learned those skills. That can turn any character into an amazing dialogue character. Characters that are already spec'd into charisma are obviously going to benefit from this even more, but even characters that aren't spec'd into charisma are suddenly going to be very good at passing dialogue checks, and the ability to just pass all of the dialogue checks in Act 3 is, of course, very powerful. This is a passive, and it will give you, it'll let you respec to refund those skill points if you've actually spent skill points on learning those skills, so it'll let you learn other skills. Or if you're a character that hasn't learned those skills, then you just get 3 skills for free, and not only 3 skills for free, but 3 expertise for free. I'm a big fan of the Actor feat, which has an actual real cost. It costs you 1 stat point, 1 ability point, as well as spending your feat and forcing you to take 17 starting charisma. I still think the Actor feat is very good, so it's no surprise that I think the Illithid Expertise feature is incredible. A passive benefit that just makes you way better at passing all of the dialogue checks in the game is going to be sick. There are fewer important persuasion checks in Act 3 than in Act 2. Act 2 has the most mechanically beneficial ones, but there's still definitely some that matter a lot. While there are other ways around them, passing persuasion checks is still an extremely relevant thing to do. Illithid Expertise, S tier, obviously excellent. Things that give you passive benefits like this are just going to be amazing, and you should prioritize taking it. Next up, Psionic Dominance. Psionic Dominance is unlocked either by knowing Charm from the middle ring or knowing Black Hole from the outer ring. Because Charm is a relatively weak ability, you're most likely to come at this from the Black Hole direction, so it's probably going to be one of the later outer ring abilities that you learn just because of the path to get there. Psionic Dominance allows you to make a reaction when an enemy casts a spell that targets you. This is a relatively complicated ability that doesn't work the way the tooltip says it does, as is often true with the Illithid powers. So I'm going to take a moment to go through what the game says it does, and then, of course, how it actually works. Psionic Dominance says, when an enemy within 60 feet targets you with a spell of a level that is lower than or equal to your proficiency bonus. So when you get this spell, it's possible you'll still be level 8, but you'll pretty quickly in Act 3 hit level 9. So that'll be, your proficiency bonus will be +4. So that means when an enemy targets you with a spell of 4th level or lower, you can use your reaction to nullify the spell. That's true, but is a little bit misleading, because Psionic Dominance actually works exactly the same way as Counterspell, where it can still be used on spells of a higher level. You just have to succeed on an ability check in order to actually counter that spell. How Counterspell works is that when an enemy casts a spell, you use a spell slot of an equal to or higher level, that spell's automatically countered. When an enemy casts a spell that's higher level than the spell slot you counter with, you have to make an ability score check in order to counter the spell, using your spellcasting ability, although right now, as of the date of recording, it's bugged and always rolls your intelligence. Psionic Dominance works exactly the same way, so basically you can think of it as casting a 4th level counterspell once per day against a spell that targets you. Refreshing on long rest, but one extra cast of Counterspell per day is already very powerful. Even with the restricted targeting, Counterspell is such a phenomenally powerful effect, and it will definitely come up throughout the course of an adventuring day that an enemy will target your Illithid Power user with a spell, or catch them in the AoE of an AoE spell, which gives you the usage of it as well. If that spell is 4th level or lower, you get to just immediately counter it, no questions asked. If it's 5th or 6th level, you can still try, but you have to make the ability check. That check is also hidden and won't show up in the combat log, so you'll have no idea. It'll just say counterspell failed, and you'll have no idea why. But what that means is that you just didn't roll high enough on the check. Even if you only use it on 4th level or lower spells, which is how I recommend using it, you will still typically counter an important spell. Being targeted by Hold Person and countering it, being targeted by a fireball that catches your whole party and countering it, is a very powerful effect in and of itself, and trading your reaction for the enemy's entire turn is incredibly strong. So Psionic Dominance, despite the restricted targeting, despite it being somewhat complicated to use because the tooltip isn't exactly reliable as to how the spell in fact works, nevertheless is a very powerful effect. I think I will place it in A tier rather than S tier, because you can duplicate this effect with Counterspell. It's basically one extra spell slot for Counterspell, but of course, characters that can't counter a spell normally can get Psionic Dominance, but your party should probably have access to Counterspell regardless, and that will be a more reliable way to counter very important spells, but more casts of Counterspell is very good, so even if you're not countering the most important spell in an encounter, countering any spell is just very powerful and something that you definitely want to do, so Psionic Dominance is going to be very useful once per day, A tier. Black Hole. Black Hole is an action, which again, like all of the other action spells, becomes a bonus action if you have unlocked the Zathis, and is probably the one that benefits the most from being turned into a bonus action because of just how powerful it is. In order to unlock it, you need to have unlocked either Displace or Psionic Dominance ahead of time. But because Black Hole is such a core component of builds that intend to use it, you will definitely prioritize this if it's an ability that you're at all interested in. Black Hole allows you to create an area of effect. It's a big AoE spell with 60-foot range and a 30-foot radius. So it covers basically the entirety of encounters, even the large Act 3 encounters. You will often hit many enemies in an encounter, like the majority of enemies in a given encounter will be able to be caught in the radius. Enemies inside of this radius, and it's important that it is enemies, so allies are totally safe from this spell, have to make an intelligence save or be pulled to the center of the AoE and slowed. Slowed is exactly the same debuff as from the level 3 spell Slow, causing enemies to be able to take either an action or a bonus action, but not both, costing them their reactions, and making them unable to make more than one attack per turn, as well as a bunch of other powerful debuffs, and it's a very debilitating condition, so getting it as a bonus action or alongside another effect, like pulling all the enemies into the center, is very powerful, and of course this doesn't take your concentration, unlike the actual slow spell. Black Hole also targets an intelligence save, which we've talked about a little bit before, is an amazing save to target because there are many enemies in the game with very weak intelligence saves. It does use your Illithid Power save DC, which is typically going to be a little bit lower than spell save DC, unless you're a monoclass spellcaster. I talked about how this works in the first video, but basically monoclass spellcasters are going to have good Illithid Power save DCs, and multi-classes or non-spellcasting characters will have slightly weaker ones, but because this targets an enemy's intelligence save, those are very likely to be very low, and so you can succeed on Black Hole's ability with ease. If that all together wasn't enough, then after you cast Black Hole, you can cast it 5 more times as a bonus action, either in subsequent turns before you have to short rest in order to cast it again, and it's just a short rest cooldown. You can use it basically every fight, and the additional casts just require your bonus action, so if you have multiple bonus actions from Thief Rogue, you can cast 2 Black Holes in the same turn. All of this together, pulling enemies into an area, slowing them, not requiring your concentration, would be good enough all by itself, but then you can do it 5 more times. The ability to pull enemies together into a single location is incredibly powerful. Of course, repositioning enemies is very good, but pulling them all together to group them up for AoE spells is insane. The ability to pull them together and land like a hunter volley to instantly obliterate them, land a flame strike, or even just run a cleric with spirit guardians through all of the enemies at once is very powerful. Special usage, by the way, is with ice surfaces, because the Black Hole will slow the enemies, preventing them from using a bonus action to jump out of the ice surface. So with things like spike growth, plant growth, or ice surfaces, you can trap them in the surface and make them actually walk out, where they will then fall over and lose their action. Altogether, Black Hole gives you so many tactical options and is so ridiculously powerful. It does not hit your allies, so it's safe to use under every circumstance, and you get tons and tons of uses of it. If this were a spell, I think it would probably be a 5th level spell. It's that good, and you just get it every short rest, and multiple times per short rest you can get it as a bonus action. But even if you don't have the Zathis and have to cast this as an action, this is a great use of an action. Grouping up and slowing all of the enemies is a very powerful spell, and one you would absolutely cast even if it costs you a spell slot and your full action. The fact that it's effectively resource free and a bonus action makes it ridiculous. I cannot say enough good things about Black Hole. This is what you want to go for the Astral Illithid Powers for, because this is an insane power, S tier, of course. Fly. So Fly is unlocked for free as soon as you commune with the Astral Tadpole, either by eating it or opening your mind to it, so it's fairly easy to give this to your entire party, and you don't have to spend resources on unlocking it. Fly is very slightly confusing because it gives you the fly action, which has a 60-foot range, but actually doesn't have a particular range. It's based on your movement speed. You can only fly up to 60 feet with a single cast of the fly action, but all it does is consume your movement speed, 1 feet of movement speed for every 2 feet you actually fly. So if you have 80-foot movement speed or 40-foot movement speed, you can fly up to 80 feet in a turn as long as you just keep hitting the button to keep moving. So you can gain a lot of additional mobility. Fly effectively doubles your movement speed and completely removes the need to care about obstacles. And it just requires your movement in order to use. You don't have to spend an action or bonus action or anything like that. So it is the best mobility tool in the game, essentially. Doubling your movement speed and letting you completely evade intervening terrain is awesome. And the fly ability will just completely solve any positioning problems that your character is having, or if your whole party has it, then it will completely solve any positioning problems your party is having. Now, by the time you get this at the end of Act 2, you probably should have sorted out your mobility tools for your party more or less anyways. You will have Amulet of Misty Step and the Disintegrating Nightwalkers. You will have the ability to take Misty Step on all of your characters. You'll have Long Strider on everybody. So your mobility won't be as much of a pain point for you in Act 3 as it was in Act 1 and 2. So this isn't as powerful as if you got it earlier in the game, but there's a lot of times in Act 3 where you need to move really long distances in a single turn just because of the nature of the encounters, and Fly just lets you do that because it effectively doubles your movement speed and lets you evade intervening terrain and so on. It's a passive benefit, and it doesn't even cost a tadpole to unlock, which makes it incredibly powerful. Mobility is king because positioning is king in Dungeons and Dragons. If an enemy cannot get to you, they cannot hurt you. Even in Act 3, there are plenty of encounters where you can completely avoid dangerous enemies by flying onto an area they can't reach, or get to enemies you otherwise wouldn't be able to reach by flying to get them, and just the ability to reposition your entire party across entire arenas without spending any actions at all on it is incredibly powerful. Fly is, of course, S tier, although it's a little bit weird to rate that because you don't actually spend resources on it, but it's just a super powerful ability. Mind Blast. Mind Blast is an action, which again becomes a bonus action with the Zafisk, that allows you to fire a cone once per long rest, and this is a really long cone. It's 47 feet long, so it's got a relatively large AoE, especially large for a cone effect, so it's going to hit a lot of enemies. You can line it up to hit 3 enemies pretty easily, and in some encounters you'll hit more than that. And within that cone, enemies have to succeed on an intelligence saving throw, or they take 4d8 plus your spellcasting modifier in psychic damage and become stunned. Now, that spellcasting modifier, again, is your Illithid spellcasting modifier, which uses the one for items, scrolls, and Illithid powers, not necessarily the one you cast spells with, but even so, because this targets enemy intelligence, they are likely to fail that save very frequently. 4d8 plus 2 damage isn't much to write home about. By the time you hit Act 3, you're going to be doing much higher and much more reliable damage than that, but it's certainly not nothing. It will help you kill enemies quite a bit faster, but an AoE stun for a full turn is a pretty incredible option, and when it's a bonus action, of course, that is ridiculous. Once per long rest, the ability to AoE stun your enemies is incredibly strong and something that you absolutely are going to be using. And Mind Blast will just win entire encounters on its own. Any encounter where this stuns an important enemy, or 3 or more enemies, you've basically won instantly because a full turn of enemies not doing anything is plenty for a late game party to destroy them. So an AoE stun as a bonus action is ridiculous. Again, just like Black Hole, this is another one that would be a very powerful spell. If it was a spell, it would probably be a 4th or 5th level spell, because it's very similar to some of the higher level spells that are in the game, but most of those take concentration, and this doesn't. Stun is a very powerful effect, targeting an intelligence save is ridiculous, and the ability to get this as a bonus action is nonsensically strong. The only thing holding Mind Blast back is just that it is once per long rest, and it's competing with Black Hole, which will often just win the encounter on its own and then can be recast also. So Mind Blast is sometimes held back just because of what it's competing with for your bonus action or your action, because you're very likely to have Black Hole. Mind Blast also has no prerequisite to unlock because its adjacent power is Fly, which you learn immediately, so you get it right away, or with only spending a single tadpole, you can get Mind Blast and immediately start obliterating encounters. Mind Blast and Black Hole are very similar because they're just AoE spells that win the encounter immediately. I'm going to say that Mind Blast is A tier because it is on a rough power level with Black Hole, but not repeatedly castable and once per long rest. Obviously, winning one encounter per long rest is very powerful in and of itself, but the Illithid powers are just so strong overall that I think that just winning one encounter per long rest is an A tier power, whereas winning several encounters per long rest, like Black Hole, is an S tier power. Mind Sanctuary. So Mind Sanctuary is a weird one to rate because just like Perilous Stakes, it has completely different effects on Honor Mode and on Tactician Mode or below. Perilous Stakes can not be cast on enemies in Honor Mode, so is pretty useless in Honor Mode since that was the main use for that ability. Mind Sanctuary on Tactician Mode or below lets you use actions and bonus actions interchangeably, so lets you use your action as a bonus action or your bonus action as an action. That's pretty powerful because it just gives you an extra action per round. It stacks with haste because you will just get extra hasted actions, and it allows you to make multiple actions. It does have a restriction where this only works once per turn, so you can't gain like 2 extra actions with Mind Sanctuary on Tactician or below by being a Thief Rogue, and you can't use hasted actions more than once as bonus actions, so you can't cast 5 Black Holes in a turn with Mind Sanctuary. But even still on Tactician Mode or below, the ability to use actions and bonus actions interchangeably is quite powerful and rates this ability fairly highly. On Honor Mode, that's not how it works at all, though. On Honor Mode, it is simply haste. It just gives you the haste effect when you are inside the Mind Sanctuary, and just like other sources of haste, cannot be stacked with any other source of haste, with the exception of the Terrazul, because it just gives you the hasted ability. You get an extra action. That extra action, because it's Honor Mode, is nerfed and won't let you use extra attack, so you're using this to cast multiple spells in a turn. AoE haste is pretty good. Obviously, that's a very powerful ability, though by this point in the game, you probably have a lot of other sources of haste, so it's not something that you're going to be desperate for, but more sources of haste is good, and one of the really nice things about Mind Sanctuary is it doesn't give you the lethargic stun after it expires or after you leave it. However, all of that said, I have found that this ability is incredibly buggy. While it's supposed to give you 2 hasted actions every turn that you are inside of it, it will often give you... I've had many characters start their turn inside of the Mind Sanctuary and receive only 1 action, or receive 0 actions and just be unable to take their turn. I've had characters that leave the Mind Sanctuary lose not only the hasted action that they were supposed to lose for leaving the Mind Sanctuary, but also lose their other action, and sometimes lose all of their movement speed as well and just have their turn... and just be unable to take any other actions on their turn. These bugs, in my opinion, are just too dangerous to make this a usable ability on Honor Mode, because a character, if you spend a resource to haste a character, and then it goes to that character's turn, and that character just gets stunned instead, that can absolutely be fight losing on Honor Mode, because your character's actions are very important. If that happens to your whole party, you probably just lose that encounter, and that is something that we absolutely have to avoid. So, because of the bugs with Mind Sanctuary, I can't recommend using it. If it wasn't bugged on Honor Mode, then I would probably place it in A tier, because AoE haste is very good, even if it's something that you will have access to already. But given the bugs that happen with Mind Sanctuary, where it can just cost you your entire turn for having the temerity to try to use it, I'm going to place it in D tier, and I would recommend avoiding Mind Sanctuary except in relatively easy fights where you know that if you run into one of these bugs, then it won't be a problem. So Mind Sanctuary, I wish it worked better, and if they fix it in patch 7, we will revisit this rating, probably bump it up to A tier, but as is, it is unfortunately too dangerous an ability to use, and I wouldn't recommend using it. Freecast. So Freecast requires you to have either learned Shield of Thralls, which is a very high priority if you're a spellcasting character, so that's probably how you're going to do it, or Mind Sanctuary, which on Honor mode, like I said, is a little bit dangerous, so you're most likely to unlock this through Shield of Thralls. Freecast is a toggleable passive, so you go to your passive section of your hotbar and turn it on in order to use it on your next spell or ability, and it removes the cost of that spell or ability. That's all of the costs, so charges that you might be using, things like Bardic Inspiration dice that you might be using, or Battlemaster Maneuver dice that you might be using, or most importantly, spell slots that you would be requiring. The spell has no charge in order to use those. The only thing that this doesn't work on are the once per life spells. You cannot remove the cost of Divine Intervention or Power Word Kill with Freecast. That will still prevent you from casting those spells in future. Freecast is on a long rest cooldown, but basically works as an extra level 6 spell slot per day if known on a spellcasting character. The best usage, of course, is on sorcerers, because you can remove not only the level 6 spell slot requirement, you also get to remove any sorcery point requirement from a spell that you've used meta magic on. So if you're casting a twinned 6th level spell, you save a 6th level slot and effectively a second 6th level slot because you save 6 sorcery points when you cast Freecast. For that reason, it's a tremendous amount of additional longevity for your adventuring day. Now, Freecast doesn't do anything other than increase your longevity. It's very powerful, obviously, and it will let you potentially, with like hasted actions, cast multiple 6th level spells in a single turn and stuff like that, but mostly what it's doing is increasing your ability to take long adventuring days. I personally love Freecast. I think it is an incredibly powerful ability because I love to take long adventuring days, but it will really depend, how powerful this ability is will really depend on how often you long rest. If you're long resting quite frequently, then it's going to be less powerful, and it doesn't particularly increase the maximum power of a character unless you are using it to cast 2 6th level spells in the same round, which is something that you can also do with a bunch of items. So I'm going to put it in A tier because it is primarily good for spellcasters and much less useful for martial characters. And for spellcasters, it just increases their longevity. Only for certain characters and under certain circumstances does it actually increase your sort of total power level of your character. But it's still an amazing ability, and being able to adventure for longer because you have extra spell slots is awesome. If you don't rest that often, this is an S tier ability, I believe. If you rest more frequently, it may be bumped down. Or if you just want to Nova down enemies with 4 Chain Lightnings in a round, then that's a very powerful ability. But of course, you have to be a particular build to use that. Freecast, an amazing ability. Free 6th level spells are good. A tier. Absorb Intellect. So this is one that I actually did not have a lot of experience using before I went to make this tier list, so I did some testing, and I ran into a number of bugs when I was testing this ability out that left me a little bit unsure of how to rate it, because some of these bugs are game-breakingly powerful, but clearly bugs, and I'm not sure if there's an easy way to trigger them, or if they trigger every time, so I'm going to ask for your help to test this spell a little bit further. Absorb Intellect is an action that, again, becomes a bonus action if you have the Zaith'isk, and is unlocked by knowing either Perilous Stakes or Displacer Beast Shape. How it works is that you can cast it on any enemy within 30 feet, or any creature within 30 feet, excuse me. Even though the tooltip says 60 feet, it actually only has a range of 30 feet. That creature that's targeted has to make an intelligence saving throw against your Illithid save DC, and if they fail, they get the absorbed intellect debuff for 5 turns. Despite this lasting for 5 turns, they only have to make the saving throw once, so if they fail it, they get the full 5 turns of the effect. Every turn, that effect will disappear and then reappear again, one more intelligence debuff stronger. On the first turn, it reduces the enemy's intelligence by 1, on the second turn by 2, all the way up to 5 on the fifth turn. Simultaneously, you heal by 1d8 hit points on the first turn, 2d8 on the second, up to 5d8 on the fifth. So you will heal for a total of, 15d8 by the end of the effect. 15d8 of healing, even spread out over 5 turns, is quite a lot of healing, so if you can land this on an enemy, then it's pretty powerful. And because it targets an intelligence save, it is going to land relatively reliably. There's 2 tricks with this ability, though, that make it significantly weirder and things that are buggy that I'm not sure how they work. The first is that against enemies with very low intelligence, it can still trigger the atrophied debuff. This is a debuff that appears very, very rarely in Baldur's Gate and was removed from Ability Drain. Ability Drain used to be able to do this, but a character whose ability score in any of the 6 ability scores is reduced to 0 is instantly killed. It's just instantly lethal to them. So against enemies with 5 or lower intelligence, Absorb Intellect is instantly lethal if they fail the saving throw as soon as their intelligence ticks down to 0. So it'll take several turns, but it will kill them without any saving throws or other than the initial saving throw. It'll just kill them dead without any other questions asked as soon as they hit 0 intelligence. You can hasten this process if you're a character that has ability drain and uses intelligence to attack, because when you attack an enemy with a firebolt or something with your intelligence, they will receive an ability drain debuff so they can hit 0 intelligence faster. Secondly, Absorb Intellect does not have the Begins Combat tag. I don't know if this is an oversight or something they did intentionally, but you can cast this on a neutral character and it won't start combat until they die of the Absorb Intellect debuff, or of the atrophied debuff for their intelligence reaching 0. So you can safely assassinate low intelligence neutral characters using Absorb Intellect, or potentially by waiting until the last turn of the effect where they're going to have -5 intelligence. Let's say they're a 6 intelligence creature, you can wait until they have -5 intelligence, hit them with 1 ability drain attack, and that will kill them. Even though ability drain can't reduce an enemy's attribute below 1, Absorb Intellect can, it will take over to 0 and kill them immediately. This is especially useful because there's a very notable enemy that has exactly 6 intelligence in Act 3, Steel Watchers. You can use Absorb Intellect plus a single ability drain attack to assassinate Steel Watchers, without risking yourself, because all you have to do is land the Absorb Intellect debuff. It won't aggro whether or not they pass or fail the saving throw unless you actually attack them with the ability drain. So you can very, very safely eliminate all of the Steel Watchers in Baldur's Gate, all the neutral ones, by using Absorb Intellect without starting combat. There's also another use for this ability as it's sort of intended to be used, which is just as a gigantic heal. You can cast it on an ally who doesn't care about their intelligence and just gain a lot of healing. You can cast it on an enemy, and you will heal consistently over the course of a fight. So especially for fights where you're taking consistent damage, this can be a very big heal. 15d8 of healing will definitely get you back to full if you are hurt, so it's a great out of combat heal. You can also use it in combat just to have a constant regeneration effect running. There's also some weird bugs with Absorb Intellect where sometimes enemies who have more than 5 intelligence still just get atrophied and die. I tested this on a party companion who with 8 intelligence, and they died. I tested it on a hireling with 8 intelligence, just casting Absorb Intellect, waiting for 5 turns. They received atrophied and died. I tested it on Volo, who has 15 intelligence, and he survived. I tested it on a city guard with 12 intelligence, and they died. And then I tested it on Volo again, and who has 15 intelligence, and he died. So there's some bug with Absorb Intellect where even if enemies aren't hitting 0 intelligence, it's still killing them. So you can probably assassinate every single, if you can figure out how to trigger this ability, you could probably assassinate every single neutral character in Baldur's Gate without ever entering combat by casting Absorb Intellect on them over and over again, until whatever bug causes them to instantly die triggers, and they just drop dead. You get all the experience, and you get all the loot, and it does count as you killing them, so it will trigger guards when they actually die, but you can cast Absorb Intellect and leave, and then they'll just die. It's a very weird bug, and obviously not one that I recommend actually using, but if people want to test it out and see what is causing enemies with more than 5 intelligence to die from the atrophied debuff, I'd appreciate that. Let me know in the comments if you have any idea what is causing this, because I wasn't able to find any information on it online. All that said, let's rate it as though that bug doesn't exist, and we can use it either to assassinate Steel Watchers over 5 turns, heal consistently during combat if we can keep an enemy alive, or heal consistently during combat by casting it on an ally. All of those uses together are pretty cool, but I think relatively marginal. So I'm going to rate it B tier, because even the ability to debuff an enemy before starting combat and gain a bunch of heals is not a tremendously powerful ability. It does cause enemies' saving throws to be a little bit lower, so you can more easily land future Illithid powers on them, because it reduces their intelligence saving throw, but they have to fail one in order to then be worse at subsequent ones, so you're not gaining like a ton of value off of that. Most of the time, your bonus action is going to be better spent on casting one of the like Black Hole or Mind Blast, because that will obliterate multiple enemies, but there are times when you want a big heal, and Absorb Intellect is good for that, and the out of combat stuff is weird and interesting, and something that's definitely worth exploring further. So this was a super long discussion of Absorb Intellect, but definitely let me know what you think about this one, because the bugs are weird, and I'm still not sure I entirely understand the mechanics behind it, thanks to it sometimes killing enemies who have too much intelligence for it to be supposed to kill. And finally, Displacer Beast Shape. So Displacer Beast Shape gives you the ability to turn into a Displacer Beast. Once per long rest, you can effectively wild shape into a Displacer Beast. It uses all of the same mechanics as a Druid's wild shape. It takes an action to use, but again can be turned into a bonus action with the Zaithis, which makes you sort of like a Moon Druid, but for becoming a Displacer Beast. The Displacer Beast itself has 85 hit points and 16 armor class, and a decent attack that does 4d6 plus 4 damage with a +4 to hit, though you can increase your chance to hit by having Tavern Brawler, just like with every other wild shape. It also makes illusory copies of itself, which are uncontrollable, but which enemies will attack. And you can also teleport. If you're adjacent to a target, you can teleport that target and yourself to a location, so you can sort of kidnap an enemy, leaving behind an illusory copy. For whatever reason, Displace still teleports enemies even if they succeed on the saving throw. There's supposed to be a saving throw to resist this ability, but it doesn't work. I think maybe it just halves the psychic damage, and you still always teleport them, so the teleport works 100% of the time. Displacer Beast also gets improved extra attack, so it can attack 3 times per round, but is going to be significantly worse at fighting in general than a dedicated melee character in actual humanoid form, or a wild shape druid in a more powerful wild shape form, like a Myrmidon, is still going to be better than a Displacer Beast shape. The main usage for Displacer Beast, overall, because it's not the most powerful combat form, but it is a reasonable combat form, is just as a gigantic heal, or effectively a big shield. 85 hit points on top of your existing health bar is pretty nice. It makes you quite mobile because you can teleport enemies around, and then you can use it to tank one hit, like bonus action, wild shape into a displacer beast, tank a big hit from an enemy, and then dismiss the wild shape in order to take your turn, especially useful for spellcasters who might find themselves in a bad position, and an 85 hit point shield is something that a spellcaster can often use pretty well. While the Displacer Beast is not like the most amazing fighter, it's still a totally competent fighter. You can use it in certain encounters. You're going to be less effective because you lose access to all of your spells, all of your class abilities, all of your Illithid powers while you're in Displacer Beast shape, but still a totally reasonable combatant, and the fact that you can use it just to absorb a bunch of hits is pretty reasonable. Overall, I think that Displacer Beast shape is most powerful when it's used to block a big enemy attack and or to fight when you're very low on resources, like you're out of spell slots. It can extend your adventuring day, and so because it doesn't increase the sort of ceiling of your character's power, I'm going to place it in B tier, but it's a useful ability that you should definitely keep in mind, especially if you find your character in a bad situation and need to be able to absorb a bunch of extra hits. All right, my friends, I hope that you have enjoyed this look at the Outer Ring Elite Tier or Astral Illithid Powers. These are incredibly potent abilities, of course, and they're intended to be. I mean, many of these are game-breakingly powerful because they are intended to be game-breakingly powerful. Because you only get them in Act 3, a lot of them are rated lower than they would be if you got them earlier in the game. Of course, many of these abilities would be incredible if you got them a little bit earlier, but by Act 3, your characters are so broken that even the most powerful abilities pale in comparison to some of the things that you can do. Overall, though, the Illithid powers are absolutely worth unlocking. The ability to give all of them to your entire party, or give several of them to your entire party, is also incredibly powerful. And you will be able to maximize the strengths of your characters very, very quickly, even with only a few tadpoles spent in the outer ring of the Illithid powers. Between Freecast, Black Hole, and Mind Blast, you should be able to have powerful AoE spells that just win every encounter all on their own. Every single encounter, even if you are doing many long rests, or doing many encounters per long rest, because the Illithid powers increase the length of your adventuring days so significantly. Because remember, all of these are entirely on top of the resources that you get just for your character. So all of these things together make for an insanely powerful effect. As always, if you think there's something that I should move around, if I missed something cool about one of these abilities, definitely do let me know in the comments. I appreciate people who take the time to like the video and leave a comment because it helps me out with the algorithm, and I'm always open to community feedback when rating these abilities to see if there's something I missed and if there's something that I want to move. If you've enjoyed the video, of course, feel free to subscribe to my channel for more of this and other strategy game content, and if you've really enjoyed the video, then do consider leaving a thank you with the join or super thanks buttons below. Obviously, no obligation, but I really appreciate everyone who has chosen to do that. Thank you so much for your generosity. Cheers, my friends, and I'll catch you next time.